Zone of Interest was released in December of 2023 and features the Commandant Rudolf Höss, who presided over Auschwitz during the Holocaust. He lived right next to Auschwitz on the other side of the wall with his family in a villa where they got to enjoy the life of luxury that they both had always wanted. And throughout the movie, we never actually see behind the wall. And that is left for us to fill in with our own understanding and other movies and what we have up until this day learned about what happened during the Holocaust. And at the end of the day, what this really showed was that atrocities and horror and the idea of cruelty is something that is entirely human-made and is up to us to choose to embrace it or choose to let it go when it comes to dealing with it. And when we watch a movie like The Zone of Interest, we have to understand that the truth behind it is that everything is happening around us and it is up to us how we decide to interpret it and to deal with it. And throughout the movie, we see Hedwig, who is the wife of the Commandant, enjoy her life. And when Rudolf is assigned to another location, she begs him to stay in Auschwitz and to continue to live there with their children because this is her home and this is the life that she created and built over the 3 years that she had lived there up until then. And it shows this dark side of humanity where you can very much hear what is going on the other side of the wall, and she is choosing to only see the good in her life, to see truly with those rose-colored lenses. And when we see what is going on in the world today with Palestine and Ukraine and various amounts of countries around the world, what can we do besides continue to live the life that we've always lived? Is there anything that we can actually do to change the narrative that these people are living in today? Can we stand up and help? What can we actually do? And can this movie change the trajectory of where it is that we choose to go as humanity? Rudolf Höss stayed where he was because he was given the power to do so. He was given power and empowered to do what he did within Auschwitz and within all the other concentration camps. And the movie starts out, it's his birthday, and all of the soldiers are coming over and celebrating him, and there are really important parts of the movie where the screen goes black, and all we hear is what's going on the other side of the wall. And it is very clear to us that this is something that they heard constantly and had to come up with some kind of story to tell their children that what was happening wasn't that bad or was something that was even potentially to their perspective for good. And there's a moment where Hedwig's mother comes along and she shows her this beautiful house, and they're going from room to room and showing her this backyard, and her mother asks her how she deals with it, what's going on the other side of the wall, and she says, this is my life, like I get to enjoy this beautiful garden and this beautiful pool. Why should I care what's going on the other side? And these characters aren't even deliberately being made to do anything crazier than the life that they actually lived. But what's sinister is the willingness to look past what was going on and to accept that this is just their life. That what happens on the other side of the wall isn't their problem. They just get to enjoy their own life. How do we continue to live our life knowing that maybe it's not on the other side of the wall, maybe it's on the other side of the world, that people are living a life that they did not choose, that a life is being forced on them, that they are losing people that they love, they're losing their own lives, their education, children aren't going to school, they don't have enough to eat. How can we cope with that? And how can we accept that our place in the world isn't going to be changed by simply thinking about them or living under duress? And the reality of the situation is that there are things that we can do. We can join forces with those who are choosing to protest, who are choosing to make their voices known, who are choosing to live a better life so that other tragedies aren't being forced upon other people in a variety of ways. And though what's happening in Palestine and the Ukraine and Libya and all of these countries is at the forefront, there is things that we get to choose to enjoy every single day that is still forcing other people into these bad situations that may not look like a war zone in the traditional sense, but is in of itself a place where people do not want to live and are forced to. And that is really what the point of this entire movie is that our choices matter and they affect millions of people. The decisions that Rudolph and Hedwig made decided the fate of millions of people. Hedwig could have at any point stood up for other people or stood up for anyone or shared any kind of remorse, and she didn't. And there was a very clear point to be made with that, is to say, hey, I just enjoy my life. How am I at fault? And there's even at points where she alludes to that same idea. And there are times where Rudolph exerts his power over her, and then she turns around and does the same thing to a maid who can't stand up for herself. She gets yelled at, so she turns around and forces it onto someone else. And though at no point do you really feel bad for her, there is a point where Rudolph is going to be moved to another concentration camp, and she begs him not to leave. She says, you leave, you go do whatever you need to do for work. I want to stay here. She wanted to stay in Auschwitz with her family in the villa that she created. And she is the only person in all of history who ever uttered those words, that Auschwitz is my home and I can't leave. And at the end of the day, it is this comparison that is being made that isn't being fully made for us. And because so many of us have learned about the Holocaust and what happened and why all of this was going on, it is really up to us to fill in the blanks when we're not shown what's going on the other side. We have to fill that in for ourselves. And that is the world that we're living in right now. We need to fill in what's going on in the background of the people who are being forced to live in these situations. What is happening to them, with them, and how are we to blame? And how can we protest? How can we say, no, this is enough? And there are many documentaries that we've talked about where people chose not to stand up. And there was a few people who chose to stand up and say, no, we're not just going to stand by and allow people to treat other people this way. But how can we do it in a way that isn't disturbing us? And the truth is, from what we've seen, we do have to disturb ourselves in some way in order to shift the narrative that the world is under. We have to choose to buy different products. We have to choose to be educated, to have better conversations, to look at the world and accept that what we see isn't necessarily what we get. When we go and we buy a piece of clothing or we buy a product, we aren't seeing the full story, and nobody is filling in those gaps for us. The zone of interest is a great display that you're not always going to get the full story of what's going on. And sometimes you need to do the work to understand what's going on. And for a majority of us who have had any exposure to what happened in the Holocaust, that work has been done, but that work needs to continue to be done. And what they really try to showcase is that there is this little girl that they are talking about within one of the stories that Rudolph reads to his children, who is running away from Hansel and Gretel. Hansel tries to take the children and cook them alive to eat them, and Hansel is able to escape. And throughout the movie, we see a depiction of a little girl running around what we think is a forest at the beginning, and then what we later understand is an actual girl within the Holocaust who is leaving apples for the people who are trapped so that they can have something to eat. We see this depiction of this fairy tale of this evil monster that this person who is an evil monster in real life is reading to their kids as a way to get them to fall asleep. And there are layers and layers of this reality that we need to strip away and take apart and reanalyze for ourselves. And the zone of interest ends without any further explanation of what happened, which is another reason why we need to do the work ourselves. We need to educate ourselves and look at these perspectives and understand what's actually going on and how we're contributing to this situation. So if you're in this place where you don't know how you were supposed to emotionally process this, understand that it is not something that you can do once or twice. It is something that you will have to face constantly if you are a person that exists in this world. There are so many things that are happening and going on that you need to process that are not going to happen without you making the deliberate decision to sit down with this information and say, what is actually going on? You have to find that information for yourself. Or you go to places where people are doing this and who are actively looking at it. And it's not just going to be one location. And you might be thinking, well, what if I just can't do this anymore? What if I've read all the news clips and I watched and I protested? How do I cope with continuing to live my life while I know that there are children on the other side of the world who are dealing with not being able to live the life that they want? How do you deal with what is often considered survivor's guilt? And at the end of the day, guilt is not an emotion that pushes the needle forward. That is not an emotion that moves us towards a better place. Guilt and shame and horror are not emotions that project us into a better version of ourselves that's able to communicate with others. This hate in the world exists because we are choosing to let it exist, because we are seeing other people as enemies, even if it's not to that level. We're picking sides, we're dividing people, and that is how we got here in the first place. The separation of people is based off of false ideas, of these narratives that aren't necessarily true. So when you're looking at what's going on and deciding for yourself how you're going to deal with it, you have to ask yourself, what story is this creating? Which version of myself is being left behind by these decisions that I'm making? And it is not a far stretch to say that a majority of people are choosing to just ignore the situation. They don't want to engage with it with their friends. They don't want to talk about it with anyone. They just want to exist as they are and have always been. And that business as usual mindset is how we are in a place where climate change exists, where there's incredible wars happening that are devastating lives again and again. We are continuing the same narrative constantly. We have to decide at some point that we are going to live a life that is worthy of being lived. We need to look at what is going on and say, enough is enough. Enough people have been forced into these situations for me to say, what can I do? And the truth is, if you are on the other side of the world and you're not in the military, you're not one of the politicians making these decisions, the amount that you can do is at a lower level, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. There are people who are petitioning politicians, who are demanding change, and there are ways to join those voices, and you can do it at a variety of levels. And the truth is, your impact may not be the one that saves all those people, but your impact might be you change someone's perspective on thinking about the world in a slightly better way. And you can educate yourself on looking at the world in a different way and understanding that everything that is happening, from climate change to the wars to pollution, is all connected. It is all the same issue. The health problems that people are experiencing, the devastation to the oceans, none of it is unconnected. All of it has to do with us believing that it's someone else's problem, that somebody else should deal with it, that someone else is going to come up with the solution, that there is a solution, that it's a one-size-fits-all problem, and therefore one day someone's just going to come up with an idea that's just going to fix it all. All of these problems are complex and difficult, and the idea behind it is that we need to look at the reality of what's going on in order for us to be better for looking at what's going on. You can watch these movies, you can repost it on Instagram, but unless you are actually taking the information in and understanding your own contributions to it and how you can live a better life for yourself, it will always just be something that you think of for 2 seconds and then move on, when it is no longer an interesting fact to share or a story to be told at dinner. The zone of interest asks of us to look past the wall and to look at the reality of what's happening. Hedwig couldn't do that. Rudolph very much truly wanted this to happen, and the very last sentence that he says is, we were standing in a room where I was getting an award, and all I could think about was, how could I gas all of these people in this room? The ceilings were too high. And it is in that moment and the few other moments where we have to strongly understand our own frame of mind and how people are able to accept these atrocities, because for him it was just another job. For him it was what he was paid to do, it was what he wanted to do, is what he loved to do. And that is an awful way to think about it. But there is another point in the movie where engineers come with this very elaborate but well-constructed plan of how to efficiently murder people. And that is why when you are a person that has power and you are not considering the impact of the power and the choices that you make, you are creating this difficult reality for so many people, this sinister world where people are dying because people made these decisions. 11 million people were killed during the Holocaust. Millions of people have died since then during other genocides, and the world has still not learned. Our ethics matter, our decisions matter, and who we are as people matters. Who we are today, who we decide to be, and who we choose to become are all connected. The choices we make today, tomorrow, and the day after are going to turn us into the person and the world that we've always wanted or didn't want. The choice is up to us. And the zone of interest is a very clear depiction that when we are willing to hide behind the wall, we are going to create a reality for a majority of the world that we don't want to be a part of. And now, looking back, a lot of those people regret it and they say they were forced to do it. But when you have depictions like this, there was very much an active decision that was made. And all of the people who are making decisions that are very bad for so many people, they are choosing to do it. At some point, you can't blame someone else. You are making the decision to do this or that or the other thing. You are making the decision to be this person or this reality. So what are you going to do about it? What world and what legacy are you leaving behind? Now, if you did enjoy the zone of interest for the incredible perspective that they provided, and at the end, they showed Rudolf Höss walking down a flight of stairs, and they show him multiple times throwing up, but we don't see anything being thrown up. And I think that represents that he didn't even know how to process what he was doing and that he was reacting to his life in a very bad way. This could just be a hopeful interpretation that he was actually affected by the choices that he made. Maybe he wasn't, maybe he was. And then it shows the Holocaust memorial of Auschwitz, where there was people who were going in and cleaning up the different locations that are on display as a museum now. They showed a huge hallway of shoes, of suitcases, and of the workers cleaning it up and making it pretty for the public. It just goes to show that even today, the horrors of what happened are still hidden. We can see the shoes and we can contemplate and imagine what happened, but the reality is we don't know. And that we're hoping that by sharing this, we aren't continuing to create these stories. And yet, when we look at what's happening on the news, that same story is being repeated and has been repeated many times since the 1940s. And it hasn't even been 100 years, but there has been multiple genocides all over the world happening right now, and continuing to destroy people's lives. If you watched The Zone of Interest, you may or may not have heard that The Commandant's Shadow is also being released. It was in theaters May 29th and 30th. There was not a theater near me that I could watch it, but it is a documentary of Rudolf Höss's son, Hans, who is forced to face the reality of what his father did. And it is both the son and the grandson of Rudolf Höss whose story is explored. They ask him how he felt about it, what he knew was happening when he was a child in Auschwitz. And at the end of the documentary, he actually meets a survivor of Auschwitz who survived because she played within the orchestra and was able to survive because she had the skill to play, I believe it was violin. I haven't watched it. I will try to find it online and watch it and share with you about that documentary. Seems really powerful, and especially if you've watched The Zone of Interest, seeing what the kids understood, because the kids are featured quite a bit, is really important, and I'm really interested. From what I can tell, it won't be released until November of 2024. Hopefully it'll be released before then, but I will keep you updated. Let me know what you think about the Zone of Interest. Did you watch it? Are you gonna watch it? How do you understand what's going on in the world? And we will continue to talk about this. And as you can potentially tell, I'm in a new location, but I will be continuing to share videos, and I appreciate every one of you who has come on this journey, and we can change the world one choice at a time. And I'll see you soon.